This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Welcome, Rabbi. So regarding the Haftorah of Terumah, which came from Sefer Malachim, we learned about Chiram was a pretty interesting fellow. He actually made himself a god, which, by the way, we didn't really explain what that means. What does that mean, he made himself a god? How do you do that? In case anybody here has aspiration, what does that mean, he made himself a god? Well, you know, and he made 7 rakia with thunder and lightning and orbs of constellations, and he thought he was God until God had to blow Yechezkel HaNavi and tell Chiram, "Hey Chiram, you're basar v'dam." And ultimately, remember what happened? Who killed Chiram? Nebuchadnezzar would scoop off 2 fingers worth of his flesh and feed it to him daily. So, regarding what's the connection between Vashem Nasan Chachma l'Shloimei, God gave wisdom to Solomon, and then Vayhi Shalom bein Chiram uvein Shloimei, and there was peace between Chiram and Shlomo. What's the connection between the wisdom of Shlomo and the peace between Chiram and Shlomo? After all, Shlomo was at peace with everyone. So I think we could say, based on what we learned last week, you know, you want to make peace with people who are difficult people, okay, that's one thing. But to make peace with a guy who thinks he's God, lots of luck in your peace treaty and your, negotiations between someone who thinks they're God. So can you imagine what kind of chacham Shlomo was? Shlomo was so smart, he was able to make a treaty with a guy who thought he was God. But we're going to learn today that the Chidah, tomorrow's his yard site, in his commentary Tzavrei Shalal, learns similarly. He refers us to the Zohar HaKadosh in Parsha Achrei Mos, that it was through the chachma of Shlomo that he was able to make shalom between him and Chiram, because Chiram made himself a god, and Shlomo ruled with his wisdom. He was able to bring him down from his high spot, which, last week we learned that, how was he able to do it? Rebbeinu Shem sent Yechezkel, and ultimately the Medrash says Nebuchadnezzar lived with Chiram's mother in his presence. But here the Zohar tells us maybe a little bit of a different detail. Look at number 2, the Zohar HaKadosh, Parsha Achrei Mos, and on the bottom we have the Parish of the Sulam. Pasach Rabbi Yosef Amar. Rabbi Yosef began and he said, Vashem Nasan Chachma l'Shlomo, God gave wisdom to Shlomo, Kasher Diber Loi, Vayhi Shalom bein Chiram uvein Shlomo. Vashem Nasan Chachma l'Shlomo, Dahu Ditaninan. This is that we learned. B'yoymei de Shlomo Malka, when Shlomo became the king, then Siara b'Ashlamusa, the moon was in its complete state. Kasher Diber Loi, the moon was b'Hashlama. Okay? And God gave Malchus to Shlomo, Kasher Diber Loi. Look in the next piece. Vayhi Shalom bein Chiram uvein Shlomo, v'chima bein hai lahai. What's the connection between Shlomo and Chiram? Elahachi Taninan, Vashem Nasan Chachma l'Shlomo. V'hai Chachma b'mai ukumla. What did Shlomo do with that Chachma? That means like this. God gave Chachma to Shlomo. This Chachma, how did he use it? He did as follows. Amar Rabbi Yossi, Oikim la b'hai b'kadmesa. He ruled over it as follows. The Shloimei avad denachas l'chir mehu darga. Right? Where was Chiram sitting? Chiram was up in the heavens, right? He was sitting on his kisei hakavod. He said, "I'm a god. I have a kisei hakavod. God has a kisei hakavod." So what did Shlomo do? To have a Amar Moshe v'elikim yashavti. Chiram says, "I sit on the throne of God." The Tanya, Chiram melech tzor avad garmei eloka. Basar the Shlomo Yosef, when Shlomo came, avad le b'chachmasei. He did a chap. He made wisdom. Denachas me'ahu ita, to get him off that position. Now listen to the Parish Sulam explains. What does it mean that Chiram made himself a god? Doesn't mean he made himself a god. The Hainu shenizdabik beloikim acherim hamamshichin achachma mimala lamata. He clung to other gods, and he made himself like them. So what did Shlomo do? Listen to this. Shlomo was able to convince Chiram that he's not a god. So Shlomo told Chiram, he was able to produce an admission on Chiram's part that Chiram said, "No, I'm not a god." How? Look in the next piece. The Tanina, Rabbi Yehuda, the Shadar lechad shida. Shlomo sent him a shade. not a window shade. He sent him a demon. V'nachas le shiva madurin de Gehinnom. And he dipped Chiram into the 7th level of the purgatory. This shade took Chiram and he brought him down to the abyss. And he brought him up. V'shadar le piskin b'chayim of yama b'yadai. And he sent him letters every day. You're not a god, you're not a god, you're not a god, until finally Chiram, after spending enough time in the oven, he admitted. Until he did, he retreated, he retracted, and he was moided to Shlomo. Okay, be it as it may, there's an interesting Zohar. So, if you were here last week, and you remember the story, ultimately Chiram did admit he wasn't a god, through Shlomo sending a demon to persuade him that he in fact was not a god. And says the Chidah, based on the Zohar, we now know the connection. Vashem nasan chachma l'shloimai, and through that wisdom, there was shalom. In other words, Chiram ultimately admitted he in fact was not a god. Rabbi Say, have a great Shabbos. But don't go anywhere.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.